This album is exactly what I expected it to be. I do not think there is a single album from 2018 that I went into with very specific expectations to the point where I would come out of the album thinking, I have predicted everything that I was going to hear on this album. Friday, 8th of June comes. Pitchfork, Best New Music, 8.7, Snail Mail's Lush. And from that point on, I was just like, yep, I know what this is going to be. We have this sorrowful girl looking in the distance with this very bright but beautifully coloured album art. And yeah, I was just like, okay, we've got an indie singer-songwriter that's going to sing sad tunes over a guitar for the majority of the album, and everything is going to have quite a somber tone to it. And that's what we got, essentially. My review could essentially end here, to be honest. But I don't want it to end here because so far I've painted this to be a very negative album, you know. All of the things I've said so far have had a negative connotation attached to it, and all of those things are inherently bad just because well, Pitchfork gave it Best New Music. But actually no, I'm fine with this album actually. I think it's pretty good overall, which is a surprise to me because all of those expectations leading up to the album, I was like, when I listen to this, I'm not going to enjoy it, and I just know it already. But that actually didn't end up happening. I think the fact that this album was everything I expected it to be is surprising in itself, really, because those things, those qualities of an album don't usually appeal to me that much, but it's ended up doing a pretty decent job for what it is here. I think unlike a Courtney Barnett, who I'm not particularly a big fan of, Snail Mail here actually manages to give us quite a bit of emotion in her voice and her delivery, despite the fact that most of the time it's very drony and very dull. I think in this case it actually works in her favour, which usually isn't the case. But yeah, I think Snail Mail managed to craft some pretty decent tracks overall here. I mean, the intro track was not good at all. I think this track is terrible. I think the recording quality and mixing is bad, like really bad on this one, and her voice sounds really atrocious. But then as soon as you get into the second track, that kind of goes away. The aesthetic was completely different in my opinion. But yeah, I think the fact that most of these tracks just go for a very straightforward sound isn't even a terrible thing. I thought it was gonna be, but yeah, I think actually, you know, the straightforward sound is doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing. Like, she's doing what she set out to do, and it actually works well. She isn't trying to be anything else, is the point I'm trying to make here. She's just doing this in a very somber way, and that's kind of how it is. The guitar tones on this album are actually pretty nice. I thought they were all going to be pretty bland, but I think the guitar sounds lovely on this album, very much like emo 90s inspired. I mean, they do lack a lot of colour, and it probably could have done with a switch up at some point in the instrumentation. But that's just how I, you know, generally enjoy music anyway. But yeah, the overall sound actually is pretty much enjoyable for the most part, in my opinion. Like, usually on these kind of albums I get bored after like 3 tracks, but you know, I've got to give it to Snail Mail here. This doesn't really ever get boring to my ears. The lyrics on this album generally go in the relationship direction. I mean, Pristine is quite an interesting track where she's talking about how, like, she's fallen in love with her friend, like a friend of hers, but this friend hasn't reciprocated the feelings, and she's just basically saying how, like, you know, she doesn't think she'll ever stop loving this person, which is a little melodramatic because, you know, you do get over that kind of stuff eventually, but I think the lyrical arc is actually pretty good here. Like, I think in music, the friend zone is always given to us from the male perspective, and to hear it from a female this time around is actually pretty interesting because it's not often done. And yeah, I think the song overall is written pretty well. Tracks like Heatwave have a pretty good indie rock groove to them. Like, you know, most of the album doesn't stray away from the sound very much, but every now and then each each individual moment sticks out in a way like this one, where like it sort of feels melodic, and I appreciate that because again, like I don't usually find that much melody from indie albums. And I think Snail Mail's hopeless romanticism across this album is just admirable, really. Like, I think just how she can just go through all these different feelings towards someone, or perhaps it's plenty of people. Like, yeah, you kind of listen to it and it might sound familiar, but she does it in a very shy way. Like, you end up empathizing with her more than you do sort of like, oh, I'm not interested in what she has to say here. I think that shy character ends up giving us a bit more of an understanding of who she is. I really feel like I've come across so many people in my life that are so similar to her that it ends up being like I'm listening to a friend, like on an album, just tell me their story or tell me all of their like relationship problems or how they feel lonely and stuff like that, as opposed to just listening to a stranger reel off all of their thoughts in a way that I might not really care that much about. Perhaps the best track here though is Stick. Stick is a track that feels very much in the vein of like the world is a beautiful place and I'm no longer afraid to die, that kind of emo indie rock. But the instrumentation here has a bit more character to it, I think. Like there's so much going on, and the track has different phases, it bounces around it with its ideas, and this kind of style would have worked well for her, I think, if she'd have carried it on throughout the whole album. It's just a shame she doesn't really do this on the rest of the tracks. There are some highs and some lows in the instrumentation that I really enjoy, and I think that it would have kept the album way more interesting if she'd carried this kind of tone on multiple tracks. But in the end it ends up just being a standout track, which isn't terrible in any kind of way. It's just, you know, it's the only one of its kind, and I just wished I'd heard more of that. Not much else to report here, to be honest. It's a very rigid album, you know, it stays within its roots, never branches out or explores many new ideas, but the ideas that it does go for aren't bad at all, and it's pretty respectable overall, I'd say. Is it an album that I generally gravitate towards? Not really, but for what it is, I'd say it's pretty solid. I'm gonna go C-. Definitely something I was expecting to dislike, and I've ended up thinking it's pretty decent overall, so I can't really complain too much here. I just wish Snail Mail in the future tried some more ideas, went a bit out there with some of the singing, you know, tried some different instrumentals, because this palette on this album is pretty standard overall and doesn't really go much in the way of anything that I would ever return to. But yeah, it's a fine album. Let me know your thoughts. Subscribe to the channel for more reviews if you like this one. Just comment below. Tell me some things that you want to tell me. Watch me stroke my beard and itch my beard. And that is it. Goodbye.